Hey guys, welcome back to another video in my healing series. Today we're covering the Discipline Priest in Shadowlands. We'll look at some of the changes we've seen and how those changes affect the way we heal. As always, I'll start with a brief overview. The Disc Priest is unique among healers in two ways. First, it reduces damage with absorption shields. Second, it heals allies through dealing damage, thanks to our key passive mechanic, Atonement. Atonement is a buff given to an ally that we target with one of three spells: Power Word Shield, Power Word Radiance, or Shadow Mend. Once an ally has this buff, they then passively get healed for 50% of the damage we deal with our DPS spells. Our healing and absorption shields can also be increased by our mastery. This style of healing has its pros and cons, so let's get into those now. The strengths of the Disc Priest lie in its absorption shields and powerful group cooldowns, since being able to prevent damage from happening in the first place is far superior to taking said damage and then having to heal it back. It also has some very strong utility options to go along with those cooldowns. Its damage output, which is the highest for all healers in most situations, is also a huge plus. The weaknesses of the Disc Priest, on the other hand, is that because it heals through dealing damage, it does require a small amount of setup and preparation, meaning the Disc Priest really wants to be proactive and predictive. They can therefore struggle with picking up many low health group members quickly. It also means that the Disc Priest needs an enemy in range to attack in order to do any meaningful healing, which can be problematic in some raid fights or Mythic Plus affixes. It also struggles with strong AoE healing in general, since again it requires some ramp up and enemies to attack. This is also not the most mobile class. Lastly, the Disc Priest, being a clothwearer, is naturally very squishy, which combined with their lack of personal defensive CDs makes them kind of a risky pick for higher Mythic Plus keys. I will take this time now to say that the Disc Priest is one of the most powerful healers in the game, in both raids and PvP if utilized correctly. However, this is a fairly difficult spec to master, with a lot of micromanaging and cooldown tracking required, and thus can be very overwhelming if you aren't used to playing a healer this way. And so now, with that basic overview out of the way, let's jump right into both our damage and our healing rotation, since they go hand in hand. First up, Power Word Shield. This is our main single target absorption shield. This lasts for 15 seconds or until the shield has been absorbed. We'll want to keep this up on our tank, of course, but also as many party members as possible. Certainly in dungeon groups or other small parties, you'll want to have close to 100% uptime on this when your group is in combat to help mitigate any incoming damage. And this is also our main activator for our Atonement buff, since it's instant cast and has no cooldown. Please note that while this spell does not have a cooldown itself, you cannot shield the same target twice in a row for 7.5 seconds. This 7.5 second debuff period is called the Weakened Soul debuff, and this will just apply the minute you cast Power Word Shield on your target, so it's just something to keep in mind. Next up, we have Penance. This is a single target channeled ability that we can cast while moving on a 9-second cooldown. We can either target enemies with Penance, and it will then heal any allies with our Atonement buff for 50% of its damage, or we can target an ally and heal them directly with Penance for a much larger amount. This is our largest single target heal when used directly on an ally this way, and it's our main tool for quickly picking up a low health party member. Next up, we have Power Word Radiance. This is our only baseline AoE healing spell and Atonement application. Every 20 seconds, we can heal an ally and 4 other party members within 30 yards for a small amount and give them all our Atonement buff. This is fairly expensive and has a longish cast time, so ideally we want to use this just before an incoming AoE damage mechanic hits, so that our party already has Atonement on and we can then just start directly dealing damage to passively heal our group. Lastly, for our baseline healing spells, is Shadow Mend. This is a quick but expensive heal that will also leave a damage over time effect on the target, which will remain until they've taken a certain threshold of damage. The dot part of it isn't a huge deal, it's just something to know. This will apply the atonement buff to allies we heal, but this is, again, a very mana expensive, hard casted ability, and we really only want to use it when large damage has come in and a couple party members are very low health to just quickly pick them back up. And that's it for our baseline healing spells. Let's now move right into some of our damage spells that we use to heal party members with our atonement buff. We already went over Penance, so we'll cover Smite. Smite is our bread and butter spell that deals a very reasonable amount of damage and thus heals for a very reasonable amount as well. And since Smite has no cooldown, this will be the bulk of what we cast during combat to help heal our allies. Shadow Word Pain is an instant cast dot that we have. This should be applied to every enemy our group is in combat with to just help provide a steady stream of both damage and healing. Finally, for our baseline damage spells, we have Mind Blast. This is a heavy-hitting, expensive damage spell that will also give a added benefit of preventing the enemy from dealing a very moderate amount of damage. It is on a baseline 15-second cooldown, although the cooldown is reduced by haste. Finally, for honorable DPS spell mentions, we have Holy Nova, which is an instant cast but expensive AoE damage spell. This will deal fairly small damage and fairly small healing and will drain your mana quite quickly if you aren't careful. So this is not to be spammed, it's just something that you can use while on the move for some extra damage and healing. Next up for our other honorable mention is Mindseer. This is a AoE damage ability we have. We can target an enemy or an ally with it and it just kind of radiates out some splash AoE damage from whoever we're targeting. This only provides atonement healing for the first target hit with Mindseer and not all targets damaged by the ability, and because of this and its mana cost, Mindseer again is not part of our baseline rotation. Finally, we have Shadow Word Death, returning to Disc Priest in Shadowlands. This at one time on the beta was granting atonement healing, but has since been nerfed and now no longer gives that atonement healing, so we will likely not use this often unless we can kill an enemy with it. So, to summarize our rotation, we'll keep Power Word Shield up on our tank at all times, and then apply it to other party members to help prevent incoming damage and keep everyone buffed with Atonement. Once we have our group shielded and buffed, we'll start dealing damage to enemies with Shadow Word Pain, Penance, and Smite in order to heal our allies. We can use Mind Blast off cooldown, unlike whoever the scariest enemy is, for some extra damage reduction. Feel free to use Mindseer in like very low damage AoE situations or Holy Nova while you're on the move. If you need to quickly heal a low health ally, use Penance directly on that ally, or if Penance is on cooldown, heal them with Shadow Mend instead. If many group members are taking damage, or you know a group damage mechanic is coming, use Power Word Radiance to quickly apply your atonement buff. And that's our basic healing and damage rotation, and we can now start tackling our cooldowns and utility, of which we have many. First up is Power Word Barrier. Arguably the strongest healing cooldown in the game, this will provide a damage reduction shield for an entire party or raid while they're stood inside the shield, reducing 25% damage for 10 seconds on a 3-minute cooldown. Next up, we have Mass Dispel. Mass Dispel does exactly what it sounds like. It dispels all harmful magic effects from 5 allies and 1 beneficial magic effect from 5 enemies. This has a 15-yard radius and will even dispel effects that are not normally dispellable, like Divine Shield or Bop in PvP, and different debuffs, dots, mind control effects in PvE. This is a very short 45-second cooldown, and while this will not have a use in every raid or Mythic Plus encounter, it does have some pretty powerful implications when it can be used. Next up is Rapture. Rapture is another very strong healing cooldown we have in that it allows us to repeatedly apply Power Word Shield to the same target, ignoring the usual Weakened Soul debuff, and it will also grant our Power Word Shields an additional 200% absorption. We can spam these Mega Shields for 8 seconds on a 1.5-minute cooldown. Next up, we have Shadow Fiend. This is a pseudo DPS cooldown, which will summon a shadowy fiend to attack our target for 15 seconds on a 3-minute cooldown. The damage this does is fairly mild, and we mainly use this for mana regeneration, since we'll restore 1% of our mana every time our fiend attacks. Power Infusion is our only real DPS or offensive type cooldown, and it's kind of unique in that we can choose to give it to an ally instead of ourselves. Power Infusion will grant the target 20% increased haste for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Now we can move on to our defensive cooldowns, of which unfortunately we have not as many. Desperate Prayer is our only real personal defensive CD. This will increase our max HP by 25% for 10 seconds and then heal us for that amount on a 1.5-minute cooldown. This is better than nothing and can be good in certain situations, but we would much prefer having a standard percent DR CD. And, of course, our only standard percent DR CD is Pain Suppression, which also happens to be our only external damage reduction CD. This is a longish 3-minute cooldown and will reduce the target's damage taken by 40% for 8 seconds. We can use this on ourselves or on an ally, and because of that, we really want to save this for our tank as much as possible. In a raid situation where there are other healers to help with damage reduction, this is a non-issue. However, this lack of defensive CDs is really the primary weakness of Disc Priest and Mythic Plus, since again, we are squishy clothwares and may be forced to use this CD on ourselves to prevent a straight one-shot from a dangerous mechanic, which would then mean we don't have it available for our tank for another 3 minutes. So now with our plethora of cooldowns finally done, we can start working our way through our various utility options. Starting out with the most fun one in my opinion, Leap of Faith. This is on a 1.5-minute cooldown and will allow us to yank a party or raid member within 40 yards to our location. This has some pretty cool uses in helping your tank to kite, saving a party member in PvP, removing an ally from a dangerous mechanic on the ground if they don't have a lot of mobility, even things like preventing an ally from falling off a platform to their death, etc. The uses are endless, and frankly so are the memes. Levitate will grant slow fall and cause the target to float above the ground. This is like a pseudo water walking, and you can also use it to survive long jumps and falls. Dispel Magic removes one beneficial magic effect from an enemy. And Purify will remove magic and disease effects from an ally every 8 seconds. Psychic Scream is an AoE fear on a 1-minute cooldown. And finally, Mind Control will allow us to control an enemy mob or player. This is really only used in PvP. And that wraps up the bulk of our useful utility abilities. So let's head over to our talents. Our talent tree will look fairly similar for both raiding and high Mythic Plus dungeons, with the only real variance being found in lower Mythic Plus dungeons or just more casual kinds of content. So starting right off on row 15, Schism will be our go-to talent for most group content. This offers us a very strong DPS and healing buff, in that it increases all of our spell damage by 25% for 9 seconds on a very short 24-second cooldown. Really, our entire healing kit is going to be centered around this talent and doing large burst healing during this 9-second buff window. This is ideally when we want to use expensive but hard-hitting abilities like Mind Blast for maximum effect and impact. You should consider taking Twist of Fate instead in lower difficulty content, since you'll likely have that damage buff up more frequently. Row 25 is our mobility row, so you can feel free to take whichever option best suits you, although Angelic Feather is usually the go-to option for its flexibility. Row 30 is all about mana regen, and Power Word Solace provides the best bang for the buck in terms of damage, its uptime, and mana restored. Row 35 is for CC options, so again, feel free to take whatever will be most useful in the content you enjoy. Shining Force, however, is going to be the go-to option for Mythic Plus, since it provides a very helpful knockback effect and slow to allow your tank to kite. Sins of the Mini will again be our pick for almost all group content in row 40. The flat damage buff will always be helpful, regardless of how large or small the buff happens to be at the moment, and this will result in more overall DPS and healing. Purge the Wicked will be our pick for AoE fights for row 45. This will replace our Shadow Word Pain Dot and is simply a strictly better multi-target option for those AoE encounters. Halo would be the pick for single target encounters. Finally, for row 50, we have our only real deviation so far between raids and Mythic Plus. For Mythic Plus, we're going to take Lenience for the near constant damage reduction. Since we only have 4 other members to keep Atonement active on in dungeon groups, it's very easy to have this passive 3% damage reduction active like basically 100% of the time. In raids, however, where there are many more members to cover, we would instead take Evangelism. This will increase our duration of Atonement by 6 seconds on a 1.5 minute cooldown. This gives us the much needed time window to get our raid topped with our Atonement buff and still have time to get out some good damage for burst AoE healing. It's worth noting here that we will likely have interest in taking Spirit Shell once Shadowlands is out, and we have some more synergy with this talent through some legendary and conduit effects. And so, let's now talk about the coming legendary effects and which are looking strongest for us. Clarity of Mind is so far looking like the strongest choice for both raids and Mythic Plus. This is the legendary effect that synergizes so well with the Spirit Shell talent. Spirit Shell, of course, turns our Penance, Power Word Radiance, and Atonement buffs into Absorption Shields for 100% of their value instead of just healing. This talent effect lasts for 10 seconds on a 1 minute cooldown and replaces our Rapture CD. So with the Clarity of Mind legendary, all of our active atonements from the Spirit Shell talent would last for an additional 4 seconds, and also the mana cost of our damage dealing spells is reduced by 30%, which is really good. Alternatively, if we choose not to go with the Spirit Shell talent and instead keep our Rapture CD, then our Power Word Shields would cost 20% less mana, and we would apply Atonement for an additional 6 seconds during Rapture. This legendary is so strong because it just provides this flat buff to our strongest talent options. Kiss of Death is the only other real contender for a lot of people. This allows Shadow Word Death to now provide Atonement healing, but only when used on targets below 20% health, meaning in long single target raid encounters or like really high fortified Mythic Plus weeks, this would have very limited usefulness. I will say here that all of the legendary effects available to Disc Priests have their situations where they can be strong and useful. I'm simply mentioning the 2 most powerful options. And with our legendary effects now covered, that brings us to the end of this Discipline Priest guide. I hope you guys found it helpful and informative. Let me know in the comments below which healer you're going to main in Shadowlands. Drop me a like and a sub if you like my content, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!